Hi, I'm Dr. Mollie Marti, and welcome to Resiliency Matters. Today we are speaking with Courtney Martin, who is an author, an activist, and a community builder. Courtney is the recipient of Worldmaker's 2022 Community Weaver Award. Welcome and congratulations, Courtney.
Thank you so much, Mollie. It's such an honor. I really appreciate it.
It's our pleasure, certainly. So you have written several books, and I'd like to start with your most recent one, which had a big impact on me, called Learning in Public. You write both as a mom, sharing your journey of living out your values as you choose your kids' school in highly segregated Oakland, California. And you also write as a journalist, really an expose on segregation and the impacts on education in our neighborhoods. What do you want our viewers and our listeners to understand about learning in public?
Let's see, what do I want people to understand? I think, for me, the book, I always write the books I need to read. That's basically what motivates me, as I sort of run into some part of life where I've realized something is askew, like sort of the way that it feels like all my friends are operating or my family is operating feels out of step with some instinct I'm having. And then I start to research and I put on my journalistic hat and I kind of get messy with all the dynamics of it. And that's really the case with this book. I have two daughters who are now third grade and first grade. And at the time, my older daughter was entering into, really, it started around preschool. I had that familiar experience of kind of looking around at my friends going like, okay, how do we get them into preschool? And what's the deal with preschool? And here in Oakland, it's a very, preschools are this kind of hot commodity. There's not enough of them. And I think actually this has probably gotten even worse these days. And so people would say, you got to get on the list for the tour and you got to, go on the tour and ask smart questions and seem like a great family. And then you still might not get in. And it was just seemed like this wild thing when I looked at my, 2.5-year-old or my 3-year-old, when I looked at other kids at the playground and thought like, this is the gauntlet we're going through to get our kids into preschool. And then when I went on the tours and it was all white and Asian American families asking what seemed to me to be really kind of intense questions, given that these kids were, not even potty trained yet, I just started to question the whole system and kind of, why do we send our kids to particular kinds of schools? What are we looking for in these schools? And asking the equity questions around why is it that those of us who do end up sending our kids to really expensive preschools don't ask, where do all the other kids go whose parents can't afford these extremely expensive institutions? And this just keeps going. In my own city, as you mentioned, Oakland is very segregated. The public school population is only 10% white at this point because so many white families opt out of public schools entirely. And then of those 10%, they're concentrated in basically like a handful of schools, even though there's upwards of 60 elementary schools in our district. So the school in my neighborhood is a Black majority Title I school, meaning the majority of kids there are on free and reduced lunch. And all of my peers, my white peers that I was friends with and kind of in lockstep with as we were doing our moms groups and having our conversations, none of them considered the school. And that just sort of stopped me in my tracks, kind of asking myself and them, why is that? Like, why isn't this school on any of the spreadsheets that people have helpfully forwarded to me of the schools you should be looking at for your child? And that just sent me on, as I often talk about, a journey of 1,000 moral miles, where I started to research the history of public school segregation and integration in this country, and especially the role of white women, white mothers in particular. And sort of just think about my own role and what I was looking for what I really thought for my daughters was what I want, the kind of experience I wanted them to have of school. So I began to think of school less as a number, which is what, if you look up elementary schools on greatschools.org or some of these other websites, you'll get a number. My kid's school at the time was 1 out of 10, which obviously is, doesn't feel really attractive. So to think less of it as a number and more as a community that I was joining and that my daughter was joining. And 5 years into that experience, I can tell you it's one of the most beautiful, interesting, delightful, joyful communities I've ever gotten to be a part of. And, academically speaking, my daughters are doing great. Socially, they have like the most loving, interesting friends. As a parent, as an adult, I've been able to make relationships with people that are otherwise not in my social circle because of regular kind of class and race segregation. So it's just been such a gift. And I think that's what I wanted to write about, not in a Pollyannish way, not ignoring some of the tensions and the struggles and the things I'm still growing into, which is why it's called Learning in Public. I tried to be extremely vulnerable about my own shortcomings and kind of learning along the way, but that I would love for people, who are part of this community to understand that some of the schools in your own city, in your own neighborhood that are overlooked might in fact be beautiful communities that for lots of structural and societal reasons don't score particularly well on academic achievement tests. And like, even if your friends are all asking one question, which might be like, which school has the highest score on greatschools.org, you can ask a different question. You are brave and you are intuitive and you know your kids, and you can ask a different question than the one those around you are asking, and it could have like profound rewards.
That's great. As a white reader, I'm a white writer who is writing certainly about your own journey, but about systemic racism. I came across a Goodreads review. I'm not sure if you read those reviews. That's a whole nother conversation for us to have as authors. Yeah. But there is a reviewer, Kate Olson, and it really resonated. She wrote, "Sure, I've read academic works on school segregation and integration, and know on a concept or conceptual professional level the disparities in schools. However, the motherhood lens that this book was written through was what gave it such power for me. As someone who considers myself on an anti-racist journey, I squirmed hard at a lot of what Martin shared about her own family's decision in the book. Her skewering of white progressives was aimed at both herself and me, and it's always harder, less easy to dismiss, to hear a critical message from one of your own. There are so many worthy and academic voices to listen to on this topic, but just like your mom telling you she's disappointed in you, the sting of disapproval hurts most from those closest to you." So you mentioned, you're writing this mostly for white people. Talk about the value of helping middle, upper class white parents spot biases and get educated and really choose to be part of solutions that work for the common good.
Yeah, I actually haven't read that. So that was really fun to hear you read. I did at some point dip into the Goodreads reviews. Sometimes when I'm feeling tougher skinned, I read these kinds of things, but I find that really interesting. One of the things that's interesting about it is that I made a commitment to myself when I wrote this book that I really did not want to have any villains in the book. I wanted it to feel like it was a call to account for white people, white parents, white women, white moms, but that I wasn't trying to make fun of anybody or humiliate anybody. I think that a lot of times when white progressives write about race, it can take on this tone of like, I'm a superior white progressive because I do the most woke things, I use the most woke language, and like if you don't know that stuff, you're lower on the totem pole than I am. And I know at the heart of that is a reinforcement of like a hierarchy of human value, right? Like that's actually white supremacist because I'm saying like I'm better than you, even if it's theoretically anti-racist. So I really tried not to do that and create sort of a calling in as opposed to calling out. So I do wonder, it would be fun to talk to this person about if she feels as if I failed at that. The skewering word in particular, I'm like, I wonder where she felt like I skewered people. But so I did attempt to have no villains, but really, wrestle with each person in the book and the ways in which their fear was at play, my own fear was at play, kind of anything I was trying to look at in other people, I tried to look at in myself. Which I do think makes people cringe because we're not used to it. And especially when it comes to talking about race, white people are so fearful in this moment of saying the wrong thing and admitting that they had a biased thought, or admitting that they had in my case, I kind of try to wrestle with my role, default kind of priming as a white savior, right? I'm a helper. People like the Enneagram. I'm a 2 on the Enneagram. I like to help people. I like to feel useful, which of course is another form of supremacy, to be like, I'm going to come in and be the helper and everyone else gets helped. And that feels comfortable to me because it means like I'm the one in the position of sort of like control and charity and goodness. So I try to wrestle with that in the book. So basically, like anything I was trying to look at in other people around me, I tried to look at in myself. And I think that, there's so many levels of what I hope white readers might take away from this book. But on the most basic level, I'm really invested in being a voice to say, don't talk about communities that you're not a part of. There's a white whisper network in most communities where you sort of like all of a sudden know, like, okay, we're supposed to look at these schools, but not these schools, or we're supposed to join that church, but not that church, or we're supposed to, it's sort of like this noxious kind of air that we breathe, this smog. And so one of the big messages is like, don't talk about communities you don't know anything about. So don't tell people not to go to a school you've never set foot on. If you have no idea what that community is like, just keep your mouth shut about it, or encourage people to check it out for themselves. So that's like on the most basic level. On a much deeper level, I'm just really hoping to be a force to make white people less fearful of letting go of things that we perceive of as this like necessary privilege or cushion, or getting all the best stuff for our own kids are sort of like investment in that. I deeply believe that teaching our kids how to be in community, how to be in multiracial, multi-class community is the best thing we can do for our own kids, but also allows us to spread resources that we have a disproportionate amount of because of structural racism to other kids, so that, it's not saving those communities. It's like great for my 2 daughters to be in this community, and I can offer these resources that I have to other kids in that community, and they deserve them just as much as my kids.
That is great. And I'm going to read some of your words before we go to break. This is a question you have in your reading group guide. And you said, if you're a parent, do you think of your kid as unique and or special? How has this question influenced your choices? And how have those choices impact larger systems, which is to say other kids? So this really is a conversation about a call to love other kids, love all our kids. I'm looking forward to continuing on the other side of break. Stay with us.
Today, more than ever, you need fast, reliable internet. At Mediacom, we want you to know you can count on us. Our fiber-powered 100% gigabit technology network was built for the future. We have enormous capacity and power and 99.99% network reliability. So even though these are uncertain times, we're prepared. And you can be certain we'll keep your world connected.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to that.
Our back and forth. It always came back.
Dad!
You probably don't remember what you told me,
That was perfect.
but I heard every word.
Not all internet is priced this good. Switch to Extreme and go super fast for as low as $19.99 a month for a year. Oh yeah, hook up your home with powerful Wi-Fi, 99.99% reliability, and speeds that are FCC proven to be faster than advertised. Not all internet is priced this good. Switch today and get speeds starting at 100 meg for as low as $19.99 a month for a year. Call 844-EXTREME2 for details.
If I could go back and change it all, I would. I think I'm gonna miss you the most. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Maybe it's just the little moments. If I could go back and change it all, if I could go back, I would. but I can't.
Welcome back to Resiliency Matters. Today we are speaking with Courtney Martin. And Courtney, you are the recipient of Worldmaker's Community Weaver Award. This is presented to a community-based collaborator, deepening social trust by celebrating diversity and inclusion, cultivating a sense of belonging and mattering for all. What does community weaving mean to you?
Well, first of all, what a cool description. I'm like, I didn't know an award like this existed. It's so beautiful. So community weaving, I have learned so much about community through this experience of being at a Title I Black majority school in Oakland with my kids. Also through a co-housing community. I live in a co-housing community and I have for about a decade now. And also had the most profound mentorship in community weaving from my own mother, who started a women's film festival when I was a kid, who was just sort of this like incredible, social worker, healer, gatherer, friend, neighbor, just an incredible woman. She's still with us. And so I think what I've learned from all those experiences, most importantly, is that there is an inexhaustible amount of abundance within a community that is diverse enough that people can show up with their gifts and their sensibilities and their styles. I just experienced this over and over again, that it's like, we don't have to have hugely complex systems in community for meeting each other's needs, because we just show up. And if there are enough people who have just sort of an unconditional love for one another and a variety of gifts and temperaments, things happen, things get done. The garden gets planted. This kid, has a good conversation with an uncle or auntie figure and works out something that their own parent couldn't figure out. This elder has groceries delivered when there's a COVID spike. It's just like the community provides. It's absolutely my experience. And the other thing I would just say about that is that it takes time, that the older I get, the more I understand that community is not something that can be bought or sold or like plays along some super efficient timeline. Community is at the speed of trust, and it means showing up over and over and over again, and just welcoming in and working with conflict and being uncomfortable and being totally loved and delighted. And that has to happen over time. It's really about a deep investment. I think oftentimes these days people kind of want to show up and like be in community within 5 minutes, and we forget that it's really relational. Relationships are the smallest unit of community, and that those have to move at the speed of trust. So keep showing up. You don't have to be anything other than who you are, but if you keep showing up and keep offering up yourself and your gifts, the abundant community will exist.
That's beautiful. It reminds me of the motto you share from integrated schools in your book as well, show up, shush up, and stay put.
Mm-hmm.
And you share a lot of what you learned about the art of listening and staying with tough conversation. Something else you do in your book, and I thought this was brilliant, you have a Black colleague, Dr. Dina Simmons, and you asked her to review your book, and then you share some of her insights and feedback and said, oh, I wrote this, and Dina said this, and this is where we are. What were some of the most valuable insights that you gained from Dina reviewing your book?
Yeah, so Dr. Dina Simmons is this incredible leader. Her expertise is really on the intersection between social emotional learning and cultural competency. So she talks about the ways in which those two things go together, and we have to understand culture and race and our own bias when we think about teaching kids about emotions in schools. So she's just this incredible thinker and leader. And she and I are friends, and then we realized we were both working on books at the same time. So we decided to start swapping pages. And as she was giving me feedback about my work, all of a sudden it occurred to me, I could revise based on what she's teaching me, but I could also make clear what her feedback was so that people can see the learning on the page, so that like the reader can also benefit from the feedback as opposed to just making it disappear. So I look like I already knew what I was doing and it all looked like this in the first place. So I used crossed outs and footnotes with her comments. And, you know, there was far more than is in the book because obviously I didn't want it to be a hard visual read. But I think what Dina is amazing at is asking pointed questions. And a lot of her questions really were around my tendency to want to help and save and kind of come into a community like this, thinking that that's my role. And it was the moments when I was supported by others, which some of which were very pragmatic, like the day my youngest probably got COVID, although it was very early in the pandemic, so we kind of didn't know. And my, you know, single father neighbor who lived close by took my kid to school, and I depended on him. And, you know, that was this moment where our roles shifted and I really understood, you know, this is what it's actually about for me in this community, is learning how to also depend on others, and you know, be depended on clearly, but that's the part I'm more comfortable with. So that I feel like she really helped push me towards some of those insights.
Great, and excited that she's writing as well. You also, I know one of your cherished mentors, Parker Palmer, and he writes about the tragic gap and standing in that gap, which he says will never go away, between, you know, the world as we know it and that potential that we see, and holding that tension. And I find that to be a real world-making process, right? We're standing here in the muck, in the, you know, shortcomings of it all, and yet, you know, a part of us knows a different future is possible. Talk about how you hold that tension.
Yes, I love and find that concept useful on a daily basis. Like, I feel like of all the things I've like learned from Parker, of which there are so many, that is one that literally on a daily basis, I'm like, here I am in the tragic gap. I think for me, this really came up with this book in particular because a lot of people, and I think this is a white kind of progressive tendency, is to say, well, the system is broken. Like, let's rage against the system. Let's write op-eds about the system, all of which I do as well. Like, you know, I deeply believe in structural and systemic change, but I think sometimes we overemphasize that piece of it in order to escape our own culpability in those systems, or our own freedom to just choose differently, to ask different questions, like I said earlier. And so does the fact that my two white daughters go to a Black majority Title I school in Oakland heal Oakland Unified School District? Hell no, of course it doesn't. Like, there is so much systemically and structurally that needs to change, and I want to be a part of those conversations and a part of those actions too. But in the meantime, the integrity that comes for me of knowing I've made a choice that contributes in some way to equity, and in the meantime get to have this like beautiful, growth producing, delightful experience and watch my children have that experience, is so meaningful. So I could do sort of the safe, automatic, comfortable white thing and go to the highly resourced school that most white people in Oakland send their kids to, if not to private schools, and then rally against the system and write the op-eds and, you know, take a big performative stand against that. But I would be missing out on the integrity piece. I would be missing out on the, like, the thing you can do right in front of you piece, and my own liberation that has come from this very personal choice. So that for me is like, when I feel in that tragic gap, I try to remind myself, yes, system, structure, like, let's go for the huge reimagining, huge redesigns, huge wins. But in the meantime, today, like, what's the step I can take with the most integrity? And I get a lot of comfort and grace from that.
Yeah, and you walk it out in modeling it for others as well, because I think that we are always struggling. You know, you're familiar with the study, you've written about it, where 72 million Facebook followers were followed. It was a massive study, but they showed that power of these cross-class relationships, and they're impactful for people living in poor areas, and they increase outcomes. Basically, when poor people have friendships with rich people, they do better, and the income and other outcomes increase. And it's not just we need to bring people together, but be in relationship with each other. Is there anything you want to talk about with what we can be doing in a very practical way to be nurturing these cross class relationships?
Yeah, I love that study concretizes something that I've experienced so much just anecdotally and in my life, which is both that I can see that when we have these cross-class relationships, people with less resources historically benefit. But the part that's a little bit harder to describe, even in that study, is the way in which those of us historically with more resources benefit so deeply from the experience. And I think, my school, being a mom at this school exemplifies that for me. I'm part of this community where there is really no normal parenting because 25% of us are newcomers coming to America for the first time. So a lot of Yemeni moms, a lot of moms from Eritrea. And then we've got like these multi-generational Black families who have their own, and multi-generational meaning from Oakland, many generations back, have their own sort of what's normal. And then you have this small minority of white moms who are like, here's my normal. And so there is no normal. There's no pressure to show up in a particular way. There's no like major competition over our kids because we all have different values about what we care about our kids achieving or doing. Some of us are more disciplined. Some of us are less disciplined. Some of us care about the test score. Some of us don't. It's just like this kind of motley, weird crew of people who are creating this beautiful community. So like, for me, the social capital is having no elite white norm that I'm trying to work against every day. And I, have peers who are in environments like this and I'm like, oh, wow, I'm like, I don't have to do any of that emotional work to not get tied up in like what sport my kid is in or how well they're achieving on XYZ tests. So I think it goes both ways, that these cross-class relationships both have very clear demonstrable impacts on folks who have been historically marginalized, but actually have like great spiritual and emotional benefits for people like me, which I think is kind of part of the story that's not told very often.
That's a great point. Courtney, thank you. I knew our time would go quickly and it has. Thank you for all the ways that you help us commit and recommit to learning and growth and justice and equity.
Thank you, Molly. This was such a pleasure. We could talk forever, but I'm grateful
We'll continue this
time.
offline.
Take care.
And thank you, viewers, for joining us on MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.